Okay, we'll get started. Hello, how are you? Happy New Year. Happy 1930 to you. The Roaring 20s. How many of you had parents who grew up in the Roaring 20s? All right? They impacted you. My parents were born in 1932 and 1934. Obviously, they impacted me. But the Roaring 20s are definitely over. They ended on October 29th, 1929. But you can see that they're still trying to party, even though there's not much to party about, because there was the Great Depression. And how many of you were impacted by the Great Depression? Virtually all of you in some way. I had a woman the other day talking about, she was born in 1934. She said, we were pretty good. My parents bought a car in 1937 for $600. So, which was, I guess, a lot of money. But they're looking for a job. The Nazi Party is no longer a fringe party. Gandhi wants to get India out of Great Britain. There was a coup in Argentina. There are always coups in Argentina, it seems. And there was censorship starting in 1930 in Hollywood. And movies that you saw as a kid, well, they came under something called the Code, which did not allow certain things to happen in the movies. That is just an actress from the 1930s or 1920s. You do know who this is. How many of you like Betty Boop? There is a very strange history. Boop boop be doo.
She was in the comic strip.
She was in the comic strip, but right now somebody in Chicago is putting together a play on Betty Boop that may, who knows, end up in Broadway. And how many of you stood in front of the radio, tuning the radio, waiting to hear something? Mickey Mouse, comic strip. Mickey Mouse comic strip debuts in 1930. Well, Minnie came after that. Babe Ruth, he was making a lot of money, an awful lot of money. The Chrysler Building is still around, which I think is the best looking building in Manhattan, the Chrysler Building. Poor Pluto. It was a planet in 1930. It's not a planet anymore, but Pluto was discovered in 1930.
So, telescope.
Yep, with the telescope.
So that you could see it.
Well, the Roaring 20s ended on October 29th, 1929, when the stock market fully crashed. And I don't know how many of you had parents or grandparents who lost everything. A lot of people that lost everything on October 29th, 1929. The 1920s decade ended on January 1st, at least by the calendar, but the Roaring 20s ended on October 29th, 1929 with a crash of the stock market. October 29th, 1929 is forever known as Black Tuesday. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, prices collapsed amid panic selling, and thousands of investors were wiped out as America's Great Depression started. The 1920s actually was a pretty good period if you knew what you were doing with your money. It was a period of immense prosperity for America. The gross national product was up by 59%. The average income was up by 38%. The engine of the new prosperity was the automobile, which had become the largest industry in the country, led by General Motors and Ford Motor Company. In the Roaring 20s, cars tripled in number, and the manufacturers of the cars used 20% steel, 80% rubber, 75% plate glass of what was available, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average went up by 400%. And people did the Charleston, among other dances, and there were the flappers, and the flappers were the early women's liberationists, and the flappers were the ones who didn't care. They were going to be in control. They were the ones who were going to control relationships. They were going to control business, and they're going to have a good time, whether it was being in a speakeasy or smoking cigarettes or having sex. Having sex, because there was a contraceptive available in the 1920s. By the middle of 1929, the economy was starting to slow down, led by declines in purchases of houses and cars, as consumers had this debt. They were buying things on credit. Steel production weakened. By the fall, U.S. stock prices had reached levels that could not be justified by reasonable anticipations of future earnings. A variety of minor events led to the gradual price declines in October. Investors lost confidence and the stock market bubble burst. Panic selling began on Black Thursday, October 24th. And even though there was a telephone around, you might be too late in selling your stock if you waited an hour or 2 or 3 hours and it lost all of its value. On Black Thursday, the market fell 11% at the open. Heads of major American banks devised a plan to support the market by buying large chunks of stock, and the market closed down by 6 points. But by Black Monday, October 28th, panic and margin calls spread, the market fell 13%. The Roaring Twenties ended on October 29th, 1929. This guy is looking for any kind of money, this well-dressed chap. He said, give me $100. He needed money desperately. You could have that car for $100. Black Tuesday, October 29th, was marked by a sharp fall in the stock market, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average especially hit hard in high-volume trading. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 12%, one of the largest one-day drops in the stock market. The fall in share prices on October 24th and 29th were practically instantaneous in all financial markets except Japan. More than 16 million shares were traded in the panic sell-off, which effectively ended the Roaring Twenties and led the global economy into the Great Depression. Efforts by financiers and industrials to support prices could not stem the tide of selling. The market lost $30 billion. $30 billion. Now, in today's money, that would be about $600 billion in value in those 2 days. The decline in stock prices caused bankruptcy and severe macroeconomic difficulties, including contraction of credit, business closures, firing of workers, bank failures, decline of the money supply, and other economically depressing events. The President of the United States was Herbert Hoover. And now he's kind of a joke 100 years or 95 years later. But this guy actually was quite capable. He was extraordinarily capable. And he was a self-made millionaire. He was an orphan. He was a geologist. He knew how to organize things. And he actually, like I said, he was somebody of substantial means. However, it didn't work during the Depression. After the stock market crash, Herbert Hoover sought to prevent panic from spreading throughout the economy. In November, he summoned business leaders to the White House and secured promises from them to maintain wages. According to Hoover's economic theory, financial losses should affect profits, not employment, thus maintaining consumer spending and shortening the downturn. Hoover received commitments from private industry to spend about $1.8 billion, multiply that by about 21 now, 22, so that's about $40 billion, today's money, for new construction and repairs to be started around 1930 or in 1930 to stimulate employment. What me worry? Well, that may be Alfred E. Newman or Ishkabibble, but remember Ishkabibble?
Yes.
I have my granddaughters listening to Ishkabibble.
Yes.
Anyway, but what me worry? Well, you better worry, because they are looking for bread. They're standing in bread lines and coffee. They're looking for that in jobs. Hoover didn't think initially that the stock market crash was going to impact the United States over a long period. After all, there was a history of depressions, a panic of 1873, the panic of 1893, the depression of 1920 and 21, which was a sharp deflationary recession in the United States, United Kingdom, and other countries that began 14 months after World War I and lasted from January 1920 to July 1921. And Hoover talked about the State of the Union. It wasn't this formal State of the Union address that you see now, which, by the way, is the highest level security event in the United States, the State of the Union. Hoover said, this is an address to Congress, but it wasn't this big deal. Hoover said, economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action or executive pronouncement. Economic wounds must be healed by the producers and consumers themselves. In other words, up to you, buddy, I'm not going to help you out. Rugged individualism, that's what he was all about. After all, he made it. Why, if he could make it, why couldn't other people make it? Hoover believed that private business, not government, should turn things around. And he told the delegation that came to the White House proposing a public works program, gentlemen, you've come 60 days too late. The Depression is over. It wasn't. Hoover also convinced railroads and public utilities to increase spending on construction and maintenance, while the Federal Reserve announced that it would cut interest rates. These actions were collectively designed to prevent a cycle of deflation and provide fiscal stimulus. On June 17th, Hoover makes a terrible mistake. He signed the Tariff Act of 1930 into law. Hoover was initially against this bill, but the Republicans, his party, said, you better do it. And these are the two guys, Senator Hawley and Senator Smoot. The Tariff Act of 1930, commonly known as the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, or the Hawley-Smoot Tariff, was a law that implemented protectionist trade policies in the United States. Sponsored by Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis C. Hawley, the act raised tariffs, U.S. tariffs, on over 20,000 imported goods. Guess what? All the prices went up, and people had no money to buy the stuff. Meanwhile, Canada. This is a year before that Canada almost became a country. This is 1930, and that's the Parliament, Parliament Hill in Ottawa. They didn't like what was going on. They didn't like that legislation. In May, Canada, the United States' most loyal trading partner, which was Canada, retaliated by imposing tariffs on 16 products that accounted altogether for 30% of U.S. exports to Canada. Canada would forge closer economic ties with the British Empire. France and Britain protested, developed new trade partners, and Germany developed a system of trade via clearing. Germany was not yet under the Nazi thumb, not quite yet. The Great Depression, these guys want jobs. They're out there. And I've heard stories over the years of kids talking about how their fathers would just leave the house, and they said they went looking for jobs, but they think they just went to a coffee shop and just hung out all day, hoping to get a free coffee. Unemployment jumped from less than 3 million in 1929 to 4 million in 1930, but the Great Depression was deepening. In October, with unemployment rising, Hoover created the President Emergency Committee for Employment, PECE, to coordinate state and local relief programs and to develop methods for increasing employment in the private sector. But with no direct control of funding for relief or jobs, PECE had only limited success. As the Depression worsened, Hoover requested that the Federal Reserve increase credit, persuaded Congress to transfer agricultural supplies or surpluses from the Federal Farm Board to the Red Cross for a distribution to relief agencies. It is the Great Depression, and there is Herbert Hoover, and there's his wife, Lou Hoover. On December 2nd, in his second State of the Union address, Hoover asked Congress to fund public works projects in order to stem the growing tide of unemployment. Hoover encouraged states and private business to generate jobs. But his policies aren't working. and it's time for the government to act. This despite the fact that Hoover thought a laissez-faire approach to economic affairs was the best way to go. Hoover claimed substantial progress had been made during the year in national peace and security, but the U.S. and the rest of the world would continue to face challenges with lack of jobs, unemployment, homelessness. Hoover wanted $150 million in public works program to provide jobs for the unemployed and eventually stimulate the economy. This is a big change for Herbert Hoover. He wanted small government. Now he realizes that government has to help get out of the Depression. That is a bank run in New York.
Wow.
Fortunately for my family, or unfortunately for my family, they didn't have to worry about a bank run. They had no money. My grandfather and grandmother lived on 97 Pitt Street, Lower East Side. Had 5 kids, 4 at this time, and took in 2 kids from another family. My grandfather worked the docks, so there was steady income, but he didn't make any money. He was a big guy. He was about 6'3", 6'4", weighed about 240 pounds, but he was a tomato can. He went to St. Nicholas Armory in the Bronx to fight like once a week to pick up an extra $1 or $2, because he had 6 and then 7 mouths to feed. But they didn't have a bank run to worry about, because they had no money. The U.S. appeared poised for economic recovery following the stock market crash in 1929 until a series of bank panics turned the recovery into the beginning of the Great Depression. The previous contractions were in 1920 and 23 and 26. They lasted 15 months. The downturn that began in the summer of 1929 lasted for 15 months. A rapid and robust recovery was anticipated, but guess what? It didn't happen. Banking panics began in the southern United States in November, 1 year after the stock market crash, triggered by the collapse of a string of banks in Tennessee and Kentucky, which brought down their corresponding networks. On December 1st, New York City experienced massive bank runs that were contained to many branches of a single branch. Philadelphia was hit a week later by bank runs, but it was successfully contained by quick action by the city's leading banks in the Federal Reserve. 1930 ends, and the worst is yet to come, in more ways than one. It's Kaiser Wilhelm. He, of course, ran Germany in World War I. World War I ends in 1918. The First World War and its subsequent peace settlements gave rise to new ambitions, rivalries, and tensions. People had high expectations that the post-war peace settlement would create a new world order and ensure the slaughter of the First World War was never repeated. These 4 guys, they're going to divvy up the world. At the end is Woodrow Wilson, the President of the United States, the Treaty of Versailles. Other people there, David Lloyd George of Great Britain and Vittorio Orlando of Italy, and George Clemenceau of France. They're splitting up Europe. The war ended on November 11th, 1918, more than 4 years of fighting and the loss of millions of lives. Armistice Day, which we don't celebrate anymore. It's now Veterans Day. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, created the League of Nations, an international body intended to promote peace and prevent war. America never joined the League of Nations for various reasons, including isolationism. However, the treaty was an uneasy compromise as each of the victorious allies, Britain, America, France, and Italy, by 1919 was looking at Mussolini, looked to pursue their own interests. Germany was forced to surrender territory, disarm, pay for the war's damage. These divisive conditions were criticized as overly vindictive by many in Britain and America. The treaty's terms caused immediate outrage and lasting bitterness in Germany. But there's an irony in all of this as you take a look at Adolf Hitler. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany in a surprisingly strong geostrategic position. Poland's created, Czechoslovakia created, the Baltic states. But the treaty put buffer zones between Germany and one of its traditional rivals, Russia. Fighting among the new states weakened them, and the geography of their new borders made it difficult to defend. Germany emerged from the war with a small but relatively weak set of states on the eastern border. The Treaty of Lausanne, that's signed in 1923. The Treaty of Versailles was pretty much the thing that ended World War I, but formally the peace process doesn't end until July of 1923 when the Treaty of Lausanne in Switzerland, signed by France, Britain, Italy, Japan, Greece, Romania, and the new Republic of Turkey. So why did Hitler hate Jews? This is a typical cartoon of the period, the 1920s. This is either a man or a woman, but it could be a woman because she has breasts, or this picture has breasts, we'll tell you. And it's a cook, right? And it's got the Jewish star and a dagger going into the back of a German soldier. During the First World War, between 1914 and 1918, Adolf Hitler was a soldier in the German army. At the end of the war, he and many other German soldiers like him couldn't believe that Germany was defeated. How could this have happened? Now the German army believed that too, and they start telling the big lie, the myth. And if you tell the lie enough, people are going to believe the lie to be truth.
But why did Hitler?
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about it. Wait, you're going to hear about it. So they spread the myth that the army had not lost on the battlefield, but they had been betrayed. Hitler was betrayed by the Jews, along with the others. It was called the stab in the back. Hitler bought into the myth that the Jews and the communists had betrayed the country and brought a left-wing government to power that wanted to throw in the towel. The start of Nazism and Hitler's rise is in 1920 here in Munich, Germany. It's February 24th, and Hitler delivered the Nazi Party platform speech to a large crowd, an event that is often regarded as the foundation of Nazism. The German Workers' Party had existed, but Hitler was a great orator, and he lays out a 25-point platform. Central idea: to strengthen German citizenship by excluding controlling Jewish people and others deemed to be non-German, which is a problem for Adolf Hitler because he's an Austrian citizen. He's a non-German, even though he's pushing Germany for Germans. He writes this book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. It's his memoir. You know, why does he have a memoir? But he has a memoir. And he predicted a great European war would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. Mein Kampf was written in jail after Hitler was arrested for the beer hall push in Munich, November 9th and 10th, 1923, when the Nazis tried to overthrow the German government. He was released from prison in December 1924, and there are the Nazis. A bunch of losers, if you look at them, yet somehow they get power. By blaming the Jews for the defeat, Hitler created a stereotypical enemy. In the 1920s, the defeated country was still in a major economic crisis. According to Nazis, getting rid of all the Jews was the solution to all the problems in Germany. There is a miscalculation by a guy by the name of Heinrich Brüning, and he makes a mistake. Using a deadlock among partners in Germany's Grand Coalition as an excuse, Center Party politician and Reich Chancellor Heinrich Brüning introduced the aging Reich president, World War I Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, or he urged von Hindenburg to dissolve the parliament in July and schedule new elections for September. He miscalculated the mood of the nation after 6 months of economic depression. The Nazis won 18.3% of the vote and became the second largest party in the country. The Nazis were no longer a fringe movement. Gandhi wants England out of India's life. And this is the Salt March. And this is where Gandhi begins to become the Gandhi that people know. The Salt March was an act of nonviolent civil disobedience in colonial India led by Mahatma Gandhi. It's a 24-day march that lasts from March 12th to April 5th as a direct action campaign of tax resistance and nonviolent protest against the British salt monopoly. He wanted to get independence, get away from Great Britain. He's arrested on May 5th after announcing plans to march on the Dharasana salt works. He's charged with violating the salt law. He would remain in jail for months. News of Gandhi's arrest motivated thousands more to join the protest, and the planned march took place on May 21st. Up to 2,500 of the peaceful protesters were attacked by police. By the end of the year, 50,000 people were jailed. There's a coup in Argentina. Seems to be a lot of coups in Argentina. The military coup of September 6th was led by General Jose Felix Uribe and overthrew the President Hipólito Yrigoyen of the Radical Civil Union, who had been democratically elected to exercise his second term in 1928 in an unprecedented move. Uribe also dissolved Parliament on September 10th. He was recognized as the interim president of the nation by the Supreme Court. Well, 1930 is when movies were supposed to change. And how many of you heard of Fatty Arbuckle? 1, 2, 3. He was a superstar more than a century ago. He's a comedian. Silent movies. Fatty Arbuckle and American censorship. 1922, the silent film comic Fatty Arbuckle was charged with manslaughter of an actress. A bisexual director was found murdered, and movie stars were dying of drug overdoses. Hollywood had a major problem. Well, their problem was they moved from Fort Lee, New Jersey to Hollywood. But anyway, and the film industry knew it. The studio bosses decided to clean up their image. So if you're going to clean up your image, get the most corrupt guy you can find. Will Hayes, who ran Warren G. Harding's presidential campaign and got him to win in 1920. He was a politically active lawyer, became the chairman of the Republican National Committee in 1918. He was Warren G. Harding's campaign manager, and he convinced Harding, you know what, some people think you're a dope. Don't open your mouth and let them know it. Just do what I say, don't go anywhere. And Harding ran a front porch campaign for presidency in 1920, and he won. But he was one of the most corrupt presidents going, particularly because of the Teapot Dome scandal trial in 1926. He's long dead by then. He died in 1923. The oil man, Henry Ford Sinclair, devised a scheme in which 25 cents was diverted from the sale of every barrel of oil sold from the Wyoming and 2 California oil field leases that were the focus of the Teapot Dome scandal. Sinclair testified that he loaned Will H. Hayes, and the chairman of the Republican National Committee, $185,000 of Liberty bonds. He got back $100,000. Sinclair also said, hey, Will, here's $75,000. Use it as you want with the party. And Sinclair gas is still there today. It's still around. $2.79 a gallon in Montana in 2015. At the time, Hayes was attempting to pay off the 1920 Republican campaign debt. Later, Hayes approached a number of wealthy men and said, hey, listen, why don't you help pay down the committee debt, and I'll give you Liberty bonds. Hayes would testify before Congress and, should we say, lied? Or hid some facts? What do you think is nicer? But he was unscathed by the ordeal, so you can lie to Congress and it doesn't matter. Sinclair would eventually go to jail for contempt of court, not of Congress. And Hayes would go on to clean up the movie industry. Now, the movie industry had a rather interesting life. There was censorship literally from day one when the first movies came out. That is Charlie Chaplin, the Mutual Chaplin specials, Charlie Chaplin at his best. In 1913, Ohio passed a law forming a board of censors, which had the duty of reviewing and approving all films intended to be exhibited in Ohio. The board could order the arrest of anyone showing an unapproved film in the state. Helen Kellerman, who is an Australian swimmer in 1914, was in the movie totally naked. So they could have arrested the person who produced that movie back in 1914 because it was probably not going to be approved in Ohio. The Mutual Film Corporation, a movie distributor, sought an injunction against the board. Mutual agreed that in addition to the violation of its freedom of speech, or argued that in addition to its violation of freedom of speech, the censorship board was interfering with interstate commerce in violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause that the government had illegally delegated legislative authority to a censor board. Court said no. Well, that's the logo of Mutual. The Supreme Court decides unanimously in 1915 in the Mutual Film Corporation versus Industrial Commission of Ohio that free speech didn't extend to motion pictures. Which is kind of odd because they were all silent films. There was no speech. There were some cards, title cards here and there, but nobody talked. But you had no free speech in movies, even though you didn't talk. New York became the first state to take advantage of the Supreme Court's decision by instituting a censorship board in 1921. Virginia followed suit in 1922. The ruling's impact. Well, there was impact. Will Hayes resigned his cabinet position as the United States Postmaster General January 14, 1922. He would become the chairman of the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, the MPPDA, shortly after the organization's founding. Back to Fatty Arbuckle and Virginia Rapet. This is the biggest scandal going. He's the biggest star, and Hayes has to come in to clean up after Fatty Arbuckle and Virginia Rapet and others. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was accused of the rape and murder of the model and actress Virginia Rapet, who said, according to people who witnessed it shortly before her death, "You did this to me." We don't know what he did, but whatever it was, that was the testimony. There were calls from religious groups for federal censorship of the movies. They didn't have to. There was no freedom of speech for the movies. Hiring Hayes was a public relations ploy. Much was made of Hayes' conservative credentials, which included his roles as a Presbyterian deacon and the past chairman of the Republican Party. Less than a week after his arrest in 1921, Arbuckle's films had been pulled from every screen in America. Arbuckle was accused of Rapet's death, also raping her, and tried 3 times. He was acquitted 3 times. They couldn't make anything stick. Well, Hayes here to the rescue. Save me! The film, Louis B. Mayers and the other people in Hollywood. Save me, save me, save me. And he's going to jump in. It is called A Sea of Real, R-E-E-L, Trouble by Hungerford. Save me, save me. His main role, though, wasn't necessarily to censor films. His main role was to reduce costs of films that were censored. So he had to go talk to literally individual state censor boards and beg them, don't ban the films outright, do some edits, do some cuts. Well, they charge for the edits and cuts, and they say, come on, don't overcharge us. The studios were required by state laws to pay censor boards for each foot of film cut out and each title card edited. Studios had to pay for the expense of duplicating and distributing separate versions of each separate film for states that adhere to a particular board's decision. Hayes instituted a moral blacklist in Hollywood and inserted moral clauses in actors' contracts. In 1930, he was one of the authors of the Production Code, a detailed enumeration of what was morally acceptable on the screen. Here's the problem. What was morally acceptable to Hayes may not have been morally acceptable to me or to you. And who is he to tell you what is morally acceptable? I mean, who is he? Well, they hired him, but there were no laws saying you had to do this. I mean, it was all public relations ploy. She's a secretary. She's also a prostitute on the side in one of the movies. Yes or no? You think, you think this would be banned? If motion picture, this is the code. If motion picture presents stories that will affect lives for the better, they can become the most powerful force for improvement of mankind. A movie? A movie? A code to govern the making of talking, synchronated and silent motion pictures, formulated and adopted by the Association of Motion Picture Producers, Inc., and the Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors of America, Inc. in March 1930. Motion picture producers recognize the highest trust and confidence which have been placed in them by the people of the world, which have made motion pictures a universal form of entertainment. They recognize their responsibility to the public because of this trust and because entertainment and art are important influences in the life of a nation. Is that obscene or is that not obscene? You tell me. It's Joan Blondell. Is it obscene or not obscene? What do you think?
Yeah.
You think it's obscene? Well, so Will Hayes. This is banned. They couldn't use this as a promotion for a movie. Hence, though regarding motion pictures primarily as entertainment without the explicit purpose of teaching or propaganda, they know that the motion picture within its own field may be directly responsible for spiritual or moral progress, for higher types of social life, and for much correct thinking. During the rapid transition from silent to talking pictures, they have realized the necessity and the opportunity of subscribing to a code to govern the production of talking pictures and re-acknowledging the production, or to govern the production of talking pictures and re-acknowledging this responsibility. On their part, they ask the public and from the public leaders a sympathetic understanding of their purposes and problems in the spirit of cooperation that will allow them the freedom and opportunity necessary to bring the motion picture to still a higher level of wholesome entertainment for all people. Again, what is wholesome? What is wholesome? Is that wholesome, Claudette Colbert? What do you think?
No.
Is that a wholesome picture?
No. No.
No? I don't know. I've seen worse.
Right.
I've seen worse. Will Hayes came up with his list of 36 self-imposed don'ts and be carefuls, informally known as the Hayes Code or the Code. According to Hayes, the code sets up high standards of performance for motion picture producers. It states the considerations which good taste and community value make necessary in this universal form of entertainment. Producers could not mock religion. The depiction of illegal drug use was prohibited. Interracial romance, totally banned. Totally banned. Remember, we're talking about Jim Crow in the South. Interracial marriage was banned in 17 states during Hayes' time. Revenge plots and showing of a crime method clearly enough to be intimated were on the don'ts list. Oh, Betty Boop. Betty Boop premieres. Betty Boop premieres. And look how she's dressed. Look how she's dressed. She's a cartoon character. She's a cartoon character. Betty Boop made her first appearance in the cartoon Dizzy Dishes, released on August 9th, the 7th installment in Fleischer's Tarkoon series. Inspired by a popular performing style, but not by one specific person. The character was originally created as a French poodle. Betty Boop started out as a poodle. Clara Bow is often given credit as the inspiration for Boop, though Fleischer told his artist he wanted a character of a singer, Helen Kane, who performed in a style shared by many performers of the day. Betty Boop was quickly redesigned into a flapper. Betty Boop is regarded as one of the first and best-known sex symbols on the animated screen. Betty Boop is the symbol of the Depression era and a reminder of the more carefree days of the jazz age flappers. Her popularity was drawn largely from adult audiences. The cartoons, while seemingly surreal, contained many sexual and psychological elements. She was unique among female cartoon characters. Think of what the cartoon characters were. Minnie Mouse. That's about it. Because she represented a sexual woman. She wore short dresses, high heels, a garter. Her breasts were highlighted by a low contoured bodice that showed cleavage. Male characters frequently tried to sneak a peek at her while she's changing or simply going about her business. Betty Boop was the boop-boop-a-doop girl, albeit a cartoon character, and that causes a problem. That is Helen Kane. Nobody here remembers Helen Kane, do they? She was the original, at least she thought she was the original boop-boop-be-doop girl. Anyway, but was she? Kane wanted to lay claim to boop-boop-be-doop, boop-boop-boop-boop-pa-doop, boop-a-doop, or simply boop alone. It was later uncovered that Kane's gimmick was not original as she claimed. That other actresses had used the baby doll style prior to Kane's movie debut in 1928. That other actress was an African-American child performer, Baby Esther, or Esther Jones, who used a similar vocal style at an act, or in an act, at the Everglades Restaurant Club in Midtown Manhattan in April or May of 1928. She stole the act from an 8-year-old. Radio. Amos and Andy. There you go. There's Amos and there's Andy. 1930, the United States Census required households to report the ownership of a radio receiving set. Can you imagine that? You're doing the census. Do you have a radio? What if you said no? What if you didn't have one and bought one after the census? On May 12th, a failed actor by the name of Walter Winchell, who was truly deplorable, newspaper gossip columnist for the New York Daily Mirror, does his first radio program on CBS titled Sax on Broadway, 15-minute feature that provided business news about Broadway. Amos and Andy, which was a daily show, was the top-ranked show. The weekly Fleischmann's Yeast Hour with Rudy Valley was a distant second. Most evening programs were produced and broadcast from New York City. Mickey Mouse. There he is. Hooray, we're off! The Mickey Mouse comic strip debuted on January 13th. And it had a similar storyline to the first Mickey cartoon produced called Plane Crazy in 1928. In the strip, Mickey Mouse is again inspired by Charles Lindbergh to pursue the building of his own airplane. Oh, Babe Ruth wants $80,000 a year. Yeah. It's the Depression. And Babe Ruth wants to be paid. He's the best player, maybe the greatest player who ever played the game through 1930 and through 2023. He also won 88 games as a pitcher. And he wants the most money. And hey, you know, guys today get, what, $400 or $500 million contracts over 10 years? He would have gotten that today. When many people think of Herbert Hoover in baseball, many recall the famous story from 1930 when Babe Ruth signed a contract that paid him $80,000 a year. Ruth was asked, well, do you think you deserve to be making more money than President Hoover? He said, what the hell's Hoover got to do with this? And why not? I had a better year than he did. All 16 Major League Baseball teams returned to the field in 1930. But the same could not be said for the National Football League. They had 12 teams in 1929. The Boston Bulldogs and the Buffalo Bisons and the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Cardinals and the Dayton Triangles and the Frankfort, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, Yellow Jackets and the Green Bay Packers and the Minneapolis Red Jackets and the New York Giants and the Orange or Newark, New Jersey Tornadoes and the Providence Steamrollers and the Staten Island Stapletons. But they didn't all come back. There was a depression in sports. Buffalo and Boston folded. Portsmouth, Ohio joined the NFL. By the end of 1930, Dayton was purchased by the bootlegger Big Bill O'Dwyer, moved the team to Brooklyn. The Great Depression was starting to take a toll on the National Hockey League. In attempts to solve financial problems, the Pittsburgh Pirates owners moved to Philadelphia, renamed the team the Philadelphia Quakers. That didn't last. The Ottawa Senators' ownership was in a similar financial boat, but instead of relocating, the team ownership sent King Clancy to the Toronto Maple Leafs for $35,000 and 2 players. Chrysler Building was built and opened. There it is. Look at that ugly building next to it, those pencil buildings that just go up and up and up. That is quite the design. The other one looks like a box. In 1928, developer William H. Reynolds hired William Von Allen to design the world's tallest building for a site he leased at the northeast corner of Lexington Avenue and 42nd Street, right across from Grand Central Station. Later that year, Reynolds sold both the leases and plans to Walter P. Chrysler, head of the Chrysler Corporation, who wanted to build a new headquarters for Chrysler. Groundbreaking took place on September 19, 1928. 1929, Van Allen's former partner, H. Craig Severance, began work on an even taller building at 40 Wall Street for the Bank of Manhattan Company. Now to be outdone, Van Allen secretly had a 185-foot spire built within a fire shaft of the Chrysler Building. And that's what the building ended up looking like. As soon as Severance had completed his 927-foot structure in August 1930, Van Allen had the 27-ton spire raised to the top of the Chrysler Building in 90 minutes, surpassing his downtown rival handily. It became the tallest man-made structure in the world, surpassing the Eiffel Tower. Walter P. Chrysler wanted a progressive image and a personal symbol. Looked like a phallic symbol, doesn't it? If you think of it. Van Allen strove to create such an image using the tenets of modernism as he interpreted them. In doing so, he designed a building which had come to be regarded as one of the outstanding examples of Art Deco architecture. Chrysler Building was completed on May 28th, although some businesses moved into the structure in April. Poor Pluto, it was once a planet. The discovery of the planet Pluto, January 29th, 1930. Actually, it was on February 18th, but that was the picture from that day. The American astronomer Percival Lowell, first suggested that Planet X existed. Think of a cartoon, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century with Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, and they want to find Planet X because it's where they have the supply of shaving cream. So anyway, maybe they got it from there. So when he observed strange deviations in the orbits of Neptune and Uranus, Lowell thought that there must be another because gravity is tugging at these ice giants, causing discrepancies in their orbits. Lowell proceeded to predict the mystery planet's location in 1915, but died 15 years before its discovery. Pluto was discovered on February 18th by Clyde Tombaugh at the Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona. Tombaugh discovered the tiny distant planet by the use of a new astronomical technique of photographic plates combined with a blink microscope. His finding was confirmed by several other astronomers on March 13th, which is the anniversary of Lowell's birth and of William Herschel's discovery of Uranus. The discovery of Pluto was announced. Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know what? I've never had Kentucky Fried Chicken in my life. I have never had it.
Me too.
I have never ever thought of having it, unless it was on the side of the road and I needed to make a pit stop. Then I might go in it. On one of, I think Maryland had the Kentucky Fried Chicken. Anyway, that's Colonel Sanders. That is Colonel Sanders. He's 40 years old in 1930. And he failed at everything. Everything he did, he failed. So he gets a job running a gas station in Corbin, Kentucky. On March 20th, to make some extra income, he cooked and offered food to his customers. He served fried chicken and other dishes that he learned as a child. Soon, word spread about his cooking, and people from faraway places came to test his food. His chicken was such a hit that he eventually removed the gas pumps, converted the gas station into a full-fledged restaurant. Istanbul! It was Constantinople. It was Constantinople. Early in the century, following the Baltic Wars, World War I and the Greco-Turkish War wiped out the remnants of the Ottoman Empire. The 1923 Treaty of Lausanne formally established the Republic of Turkey, which moved its capital to Ankara. Old Constantinople, long known informally as Istanbul, officially adopted the name on March 28. The 1930 legacy as we leave here. After leaving the White House, Herbert Hoover became a critic of Roosevelt's economic policies. He warned that the New Deal had a pronounced odor of totalitarian government, attacked Roosevelt's agricultural policies as goose-stepping the people under this pinkish banner of planned economy. The irony, the New Deal owed much of what it became to what Hoover begun. Hoover became the chairman of the Boys Club of America in 1936. 300 clubs then in 150 cities and towns. By 1960, the Boys Club of America had more than 600 clubs, 300 cities, serving 600,000 boys. He would serve in Harry S. Truman's administration in the late 1940s. He died in 1964. Herbert Hoover called it a depression. Hoover was proud of the fact that he was the only living American with a depression named after him. He could joke about it, eventually. No Nazis, that is me in the former East Germany and Rockstock, Germany. Germany annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia in 1938, invaded Poland September 1st, 1939, which started World War II. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. That war ended in 1945. Gandhi, 1947. The British reluctantly agreed to grant independence to the people of the Indian subcontinent. 5:17 p.m. on January 30th, 1948. Gandhi was with his grandnieces in the garden of Birla House on his way to address a prayer meeting when Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist, fired 3 bullets into his chest from a pistol at close range. According to some accounts, he died instantly. Argentina has had other coups. The revolution in 1943 started with a coup d'etat by the military on June 4th, 1943. Some called Revolution Libertadora was a transitional military dictatorship brought about by the coup d'etat, which overthrew the President Juan Domingo Perón and lasted between September 16th and 23rd, 1955. The military coup, March 29th, 1962, unique. Arturo Frondizi was overthrown, was not a member of the military who took power, but a civilian by the name of Jose Maria Guido. On June 28, 1996, military uprising led by the general Juan Carlos Agania overthrew the President Ortillo Illa. On March 24, 1976, a new military uprising overthrew the President Isabel Perón, not to be confused with Evita, and established a permanent dictatorship. 1982, the military government entered into the Falklands War against the United Kingdom. They lost, and that overthrew the government. And Raul Alfonsin of the Radical Civic Union won the elections and assumed power on December 10th, 1983. That is Joseph Breen, and he's the guy who really hammered the producers. Will Hay's Code was not evenly enforced. In 1934, he appointed the tough Irish Catholic Joseph Breen to head the Production Code Administration, a newly created department of the MPPDA to administer the Motion Picture Production Code.
Unlike previous attempts at self-censorship, PCA decisions became binding. No film could be exhibited in an American theater without a stamp of approval from the PCA. Any producer trying to do so faced a fine of $25,000. That was Betty Boop in 1933. You could see cleavage. You could see her curves. By 1939, she didn't look like that anymore. In May 1932, Helen Kane filed a $250,000 infringement lawsuit against Max Fleischer and Paramount Publics Corporation over the Betty Boop cartoon for deliberate caricature that produced unfair competition. Kane had risen to stardom in the late 1920s as the Boop Boop Be Doop Girl, star of stage recordings and films for Paramount. On May 5th, 1934, the New York State Supreme Court found insufficient evidence to support the Kane's claim and found in favor of the defendants. Both Kane and the cartoon character were at the end of their popularity. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In TV show in the late 60s and early 70s used Boop Boop Ba-Doop as part of a song leading into satirical news. And there is Betty Boop. Well, her best performances are considered to be in the first 3 years due to her jazz baby character and innocent sexuality, which was aimed at adults. But the content of her films was affected by the National League of Decency and Production Code of 1934. She became a spinster housewife, or a career girl who wore a fuller dress or skirt. As time progressed, the curls in her hair gradually decreased in number. She also eventually stopped wearing gold bracelets, hoop earrings, and she became more mature and wiser in personality compared to her earlier years. People crowded around the radio. The 1930s, or 1930, was the beginning of the golden age of radio, a reign that would last until the mid-1950s. At the start of the decade, 12 million American households owned a radio. By 1939, there was 28 million. Radios became cheaper. They became a piece of furniture in the average family's living room, with parents and children alike crowding around the set to hear the latest installment of their favorite show. Radio also provided entertainment along with news and information. I put on the mouse ears once. Mickey Mouse made his first appearance in the animated short Steamboat Willie, which was released on November 18, 1928. Steamboat Willie's success ushered in a new era of cartoon storytelling and set the stage for Walt Disney's domination of the medium, which would see Disney creating the Oscar-winning Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. The Babe. Babe got his money. Major League Baseball retained 16 teams. The National Football League was down to 8 teams, and the National Hockey League ended up with 6 teams, but not all the teams folded. Claim that was Depression-related. World War II played a role in the league dropping to 6 teams. National Football League is incredibly successful, while Major League Baseball has lost much of its luster. There's the Empire State Building. Chrysler Building measured 1,046 feet tall, first man-made structure to top 1,000 feet. Skyscraper was taller than the highest point in 5 other states at the time. Its reign as the world's tallest building wouldn't last long. Empire State Building opened in 1931, 1,250 feet. Chrysler Building was listed as a national landmark in 1976. The lobby and facade were declared New York City landmarks in 1978. Pluto. On August 24, 2006, the International Astronomical Union voted to strictly define a planet, which ultimately downgraded from the 9th planet, so whatever you learned in school, doesn't matter, from the 9th planet from the sun to a dwarf planet. The AIU determined the planet must meet 3 criteria: orbits around the sun, a spherical shape, it's big enough that its gravity cleared away any other objects of a similar size near its orbit. Poor Pluto wasn't gravitational dominant, so it's a dwarf planet today. Kentucky Fried Chicken, that is in Curacao.
Curacao, yeah. Curacao, complete with reindeer and everything else. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Harlan David Sanders founded Kentucky Fried Chicken, later acted as the company's brand ambassador and symbol. His name and image are still symbols of the company. The title, Colonel, was honorary, Kentucky Colonel, not a military rank. The first KFC franchise opened in South Salt Lake, Utah in 1952. There are 20,000 KFCs in 125 countries. The legacy.
Who was the president?
In Hoover.
Was during this?
Yeah, Herbert Hoover. And
Thank you.
that is Istanbul.
Oh.
Istanbul, not Constantinople, is a 1953 novelty song with lyrics by Jimmy Kennedy and music by Nat Simon. It was written on the 500th anniversary of the fall of Constantinople to the Ottomans. The lyrics, let's try that again. Humorously referred to the official renaming of the city of Constantinople to Istanbul. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks. Thank you so much. Happy New Year. Any questions, any comments?
Thank you.